Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. This is a special broadcast. As you can see, I'm not in the studio. I'm at the Raisina Dialogue, India's biggest annual foreign policy event that features leaders, policymakers, private players and journalists from all over the world. Today I had some very interesting and engaging conversations, and on the show we want to bring you the highlights of those conversations. I spoke to Dr. Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister, on leadership and cricket and what it's like to play in the team of Captain Modi. Pietersen, former England captain, on India's cricketing journey and his plans to join politics. Blair, former UK Prime Minister, on India's transformation from the British Raj to Amrit Kal. I also discussed the changing nature of warfare in the wake of what's happening in Ukraine. India's Chief of Defence Staff said, India's best bet is self-reliance, and we are on course to achieving that. Australia's Chief of Defence Staff said, war is a clash of wills, and the conflict in Ukraine is not a de facto war between Russia and NATO. And former US Defence Secretary Jim Mattis said, America will keep arming Ukraine while it is ready to open a new front against China. But when I asked him about Washington's hypocrisy on furthering the cause of democracy, he had no response. Literally. Take a look. Mr. Blair, Mr. Pietersen, Dr. Jaishankar, good afternoon. Mr. Blair, let's begin with you. From the British Raj to Amrit Kal. Thank you. From the British Raj to Amrit Kal, we're talking about two different worlds connected by cricket. The world has changed and cricket has changed. What sort of parallels and divergences do you see?
Right, well, thank you, Palki, for that introduction. So, look, I think the change that's happening in the world today is, people talk about whether power's shifting east. I think it's not so much shifting as today power is going to be shared. Right? There is no doubt that the rise of China, the rise of India now has changed geopolitics. You've got Indonesia now becoming an increasingly powerful country. I think the Philippines is going to make great strides. Vietnam, its economy has surged enormously over these past years. So I think we are definitely in a new era. But I think there are several things that are interesting about it that need reflecting. I think the real challenge today is how you make sense of this shifting geopolitics. And in that, I think the position of India is absolutely critical, because the progress of India in these last years has been remarkable and extraordinary. And I think the position of India now, this is again my view as an outsider, is potentially more powerful than it's ever been. With the G20, this is in a way a demonstration of its authority on the global stage. But increasingly around the world, when countries are worried about whether they have to choose between the USA and China, I think India is a country seen by many as an objective friend. And I think it's got the opportunity now to lead the global south in a way that's never been true before.
But your point of power being shared and not shifted so much, is the West prepared to share that power? Because I do not see a lot of enthusiasm on United Nations Security Council reform to start with.
Yeah, but the West has got no option. And the trouble with the UN Security Council reform, which of course should happen, I mean, it's absurd that you've got a situation where India is not a permanent member, but you could say that about other countries as well. But leave aside that, because the problem always with reforming the UN Security Council is how do you get consensus? But the West has got no option but to share the power. The question is how you make sense of international diplomacy in this new world.
Dr. Jaishankar, India today is a bigger economy than Britain. It is a geopolitical power. It is a post-colonial country that dominates the originally English sport of cricket. Would you call it a reversal of power?
Would I call it?
A reversal of power.
I would call it rebalancing, but I would also say this is history which is switch hitting. It's hitting the other way, right?
Not far wrong.
But seriously, in history, you have these ups and downs. It's not often that actually countries get a second or a third bite of the apple. I think India today is in a very unusual position that it is once more very decisively upwardly mobile, which a lot of other civilizational states, barring one actually, are not anymore in a position to do. Where the UK is concerned, I think it's a very complex relationship. I mean, there's a lot. The most popular film in India last year was a film called RRR, and this had to do with the British era. And just I'm trying to put it delicately. You weren't the nice guys in the movie. The reason I said...
Can I sit here as a South African?
Yeah, no.
Please.
The fact is, when you have this kind of complex history, there would be the downside of it. There would be the suspicions. There would be the unresolved problems. At the same time, there will be bonds. There will be similarities, and cricket happens to be one of them. Now, in terms of the shifting weight of cricket, when it started to shift, actually people, I think, suggested we were better at the business of cricket than in the game of cricket. I think by now, barring this match, by now, I think the game of cricket has shifted as well.
Would you say we've also aced the politics of cricket, not just the game? We've been able to successfully weaponize it specifically against some of our Western neighbors.
No, I wouldn't. We don't weaponize anything. We are nice people. I strongly rebut that. Look, when anything is successful, there's a natural desire to be part of that. Now, it's understandable, but if you want to be part of what is good, what is decent, what is doing well in the world, then it's also expected that the rest of your behavioral pattern would reflect that.
Kevin Pietersen, the game of cricket was introduced to India by some British traders back in the 18th century or the beginning of the 18th century. Today, India ranks higher than England in the ICC and higher than South Africa. How do you see this journey, India's journey, both on the cricket pitch and the geopolitical arena?
Yeah, I mean, a fascinating debate, and thank you so much for bringing me to India again. It is a place that I love. I've been coming here for 20 years now, and the country just keeps getting better and better. I think with the world and where the world is at the moment, cricket or sport can be the one that sort of unifies the world. I think as Joe Public, the world is actually a very scary place for us. And so for me, sitting here now, just trying to understand so many different opinions. You hear Russia speak only an hour or so ago. You then hear the gentleman last night. You hear Bill Gates talking about certain ways the world's going. I can just say from my side that the world for Joe Public is a very scary place. Digitally, scary. The war, scary. Pandemics, future pandemics, scary. So when we talk about cricket and we talk about that opportunity to unite, sport should be used. Sport can be used. The relationships between England and India, I mean, I was one of the first guys that broke away from England and had that sort of separation from the national side because of my affiliation with India and the IPL and the start of the IPL. You now have a look at the world of cricket that we're talking about. All the players from all around the world, friendships, almost homes here in this beautiful country. That's what cricket has done. English players, great friendships with Indian players. Indian players have great friendships with English players, with players from the Caribbean. Australian players. I know you guys are playing in a huge series at the moment against Australia. During, before, and after those games, the friendships are rife. And so I think that sport can be used in some sort of fashion to be able to try and mend it. Cricket's an issue because China and America don't play cricket. Russia definitely don't play cricket.
Dr. Jaishankar, from honorable rivalries to now very vicious personal attacks, would you say sledging both in cricket and in politics has become par for the course?
The personal attacks was the politics or the cricket? But anyway, I know the answer. Now look, if I could just pick up on something which Kevin said. He spoke about sports, cricket specifically, as a way of bonding, of uniting. I also look at it in a slightly different way. I mean, think of us, we're from the world of sports, from the world of politics, from the world of diplomacy, and what is common amongst the three of us? All of them are extremely competitive activities. So at the end of the day, sports or politics or diplomacy are ways of taking your competitive spirit into a particular domain. Now, when you speak about leadership, leadership is about making choices, having the courage to make the choices at difficult moments in the middle of a competition. Now, when you are competitive, yes, sometimes competition can be very extreme. And that's the kind of, situation you are talking about. It will happen because not everybody would play by the rules. Not everybody, sometimes it could be temperament, sometimes it could be the compulsions of a situation. It can happen.
I want to quote from what Mike Pompeo recently said about you in his book. He called you, and I'm quoting, a professional, rational, and a fierce defender of his boss and his country. And since you believe in cricket analogies, with a captain like Prime Minister Modi, how do you really set your field? Do you play an aggressive game and close in on the batsmen, or do you focus more on guarding the boundaries mostly?
Well, I think with Prime Minister Modi, with Captain Modi, there's a lot of net practice. I mean, the net practice starts at 6 o'clock in the morning and goes on till fairly late. But again, there's also, and I'm sure Kevin would agree, I mean, if you have a particular bowler who you trust in or you've seen perform, you would give them the latitude. You throw the ball to them at the right moment. You would trust them to deal with that particular situation. And I think in that sense, Captain Modi does give his bowlers a certain amount of freedom. I mean, he expects you to take that wicket if he gives you the chance to do it.
Mr. Blair, I want to talk about the tough calls. I'm sure you relate to that. And also now, especially when A, it appears more players are not playing by the rules around you, and B, you are constantly being questioned because, the old boys clubs are over and done with. This is the age of social media. How does it sort of impact leadership when you have to respond to the persistent questioning and demands of the millions on your feed and the billions on the street?
Yeah, so I'm glad you didn't ask me to comment on the cricket, since I've been out of my depth on that one. And by the way, you did ask, actually, and I didn't respond about the UK-India relationship. It's a great relationship for the future today. And although he's not in my politics, there's a guy in Downing Street today that I think has some Indian connection. So that's a demonstration, by the way, I hope, of the open-mindedness of my country as well, which is a good thing to say. So you asked about leadership. Look, the thing about leadership in an era of social media is it's just got a lot more tough. Okay, because the thing about social media is it's frankly a plague on politics, really, because it's the platform for the loudmouth. I mean, in the end, I mean, I'm going to offend some people here, but I'm sorry, but the fact is, one of the first lessons of leadership is to understand that those that shout loudest don't deserve to be heard most. Right? Unfortunately, social media, that's where they're shouting loudest. And so leadership's been the same since time immemorial. Leaders step up when others step back. Leaders are prepared to take responsibility and take decisions. And most of all, leaders know that criticism comes with the job. You know, I always say to people, if you don't want criticism, don't become a leader. And there's one other thing, by the way, that good leaders do, and here I think cricket is a useful analogy. A good leader picks a good team. There you are.
Absolutely. Dr. Jaishankar, do you consider yourself part of the old boys club?
Well, you know, I recently used the word old, and a few people commented on it. I wasn't obviously using it for myself at that point of time. Old boy, no, old boy club, not really, because in an interesting way, I think that kind of concept really doesn't exist in today's India. Certainly not in the, you know, the kind of environment that I've been in, neither in politics nor actually even in diplomacy anymore. So the answer is no, I wouldn't consider myself to be part of the old boys club. But that's how I see myself. I mean, I don't know what you do.
You know, I've always wanted to ask you this question. How did the transformation from a diligent diplomat to a rock star neta come about? I mean, you're being quoted by the German Chancellor. Meme makers are going through your speeches to look for content. Did you think foreign policy is going to become so popular in India? When they say foreign policy does not win elections, this immense interest.
You know, I think some of it is the times. It's the situation. Again, we're all agreed the world's in a very tough place. Because the world's in a tough place, I think more people are getting interested in the world. They're interested in the problems of the world. They're interested in the solutions of the world. The second is actually the globalization of India itself. You know, ask yourself, we have 1 million students, Indian national students out in the world at any given point. There are 34 million Indians and people of Indian origin abroad in the world. And many of the people of Indian origin in some way remain connected to India. So much, you know, many more Indians are traveling. Many more Indians today have businesses outside. Our exports are more. Even at home, a lot of people sitting at home do more business outside. So what has happened to my mind in maybe the last decade or so has been a very unconscious but actually a very deep globalization of India. And therefore young people especially, but not only young people, I think take much more interest in the world than they used to. Now when they take interest in the world, you know, I guess they would like to see, you know, like a cricket team, you would like to see, you know, people out there go and perform well. You know, you don't only want to win matches at home, you want to win matches abroad as well.
Indeed, we do. Kevin Pietersen, you've been described as and I'm quoting, a maverick genius who refused to fit in and had to pay the price for it. Is that how you see your journey? And what does it really take to be an outlier in a world that is increasingly being led by people who depend on data crunchers, who depend on processes and systems, and not always their gut feeling?
I think you've just got to believe in yourself. And you've also got to believe in the people around you, as Mr. Jaishankar's just mentioned there now. It's about using all your resources, and what Tony said about picking the right team and picking your best team. And I think in the world that we live in now, you've got to be so strong-willed, and you've got to have that determination to do anything, almost anything, within the rules, to succeed. I think in this digital age that Tony alluded to there, I think it's incredibly difficult. Without accountability for anything that anyone may say, anyone in this room may be saying something about one of us right now on their device with zero accountability. I think it's that self-determination and that sort of tunnel vision to try and set yourself that goal to achieve something that cannot be interfered with. My career was towards the end of that boom in social media, and I think I finished 2018, but 2000 sort of the height of my career was 2007 to 2012 to 2013, and social media wasn't what it is now. I think it's a cesspit, if I'm honest, and I think it's a dangerous, dangerous place.
Mr. Blair, is that how you see social media, as a necessary evil, which has clearly changed the rules of engagement between leaders and their constituencies?
Yeah, but I think, you know, we focused on the negative side of technology, and, you know, technology does have its negative side. The thing I'd like to say, though, is technology has its positive side. I mean, we're living through a 21st century technology revolution that's every bit as revolutionary as the 19th century industrial revolution, and it's going to change everything. And basically, one of the great challenges of leadership today in politics is how do you harness the opportunities of that technology revolution? Because AI, cloud computing, bioscience, everything is going to change. The way we live, the way we work, the way we think and interact with each other. And the biggest challenge, in my view, is that the policymakers and the change makers are often in two different rooms not talking to each other. And they need to talk to each other. Kevin's absolutely right. You know, you're bringing up children in a completely new world where they're subject to all sorts of influences and so on. But this technology revolution is central. And it's one of the reasons why India's done so well in these last years. Because I think, you know, Prime Minister Modi has understood the importance of it. And your digital ID program, I think it's one of the most important programs. I keep saying to people around the world, if you want to see an example of a reform that leads to real results and shows that government can work for people, look at India's digital ID program. It's been a remarkable transformation. And, you know, that's where, by the way, if you want to help some of the poorest countries in the world today, I think a lot of the poorest countries in the world, if they embrace technology in the right way with the right help, they don't have to replicate the legacy systems of developed countries. They can actually, in health, in education, and in the role government plays, they can bypass all of that. So technology, yep, it's got its downsides, but it's a fact, and if we understand it and we master it properly, we can make it work for people.
Dr. Jaishankar, was this a sort of a conscious leadership call that this is the age of IPL, we don't want specialists, we want all-rounders, we want leaders who can deliver on policy and also communicate it effectively?
No, you know, that's a completely new analogy you're using. You want all-rounders. I still think you need specialist batsmen, right?
You need them all.
Yeah, so all-rounders have a use, but I think you also have people who have domain skills. My sense today is actually governance has become very complex. In an interesting way, where politics is concerned, you know, it's not so much politics has become complex, but how do you explain that governance to people? And to some extent, how do you motivate them? I think today part of politics is also to communicate that to people, so that they become participants in it. After all, you know, they are the beneficiaries, they are the stakeholders. So in that sense, yes, you know, both in a curious kind of way, you got to do more things, but also in the same breath, I would say you got to do your own thing that much better, because people are going to hold you to account much more strictly than before.
So do you agree with them when they say that social media is dangerous?
I have 2.5 million followers and I like them. So.
Wonderful. Kevin Pietersen,
How many?
2.5 million.
I started late.
And I never started.
You've done well.
Your take on politics today, and since you've spoken about how so many things in the world today bother you, are you thinking of taking a plunge in politics and probably fixing some of them?
I think it's the poison chalice at the moment, but I think with the poison chalice comes incredible leaders. And if leadership is something that you want to get involved in and you are going to cop a lot of stick with, and you want to accept it and you want to understand it and you want to acknowledge the fact that it's going to happen, then absolutely. I mean, just sitting here as Joe Public, being invited to this conference and being privy to some of the conversations, I know I speak for a lot of people wanting the world to be a better place. I know I speak for a lot of people who, I mean, I can speak to most of the men in this room. When you argue with your wife, sometimes you have to just accept that she's right, even though she may not be right. But to have peace, sometimes you need to do that. And I just think that maybe people should get in a room and maybe people should just sit together and accept that it might not be ideal. But what I'm trying to explain is that we're not living in a world which is very peaceful. It may be a little bit safer, not safer in some places. And I live in London, I live in the UK. The UK has a lot of issues, a hell of a lot of issues. So I suppose I just sit here saying, will I get into politics? Absolutely not. But as somebody who has access to rooms like this, and lucky enough around the world can have access to some pretty cool people and some fun conversations, if there are people in this room who can make this world a better place and can say to their wife, yes, you're right, even though you're not right, but for peace, make it happen. Please.
I think just getting people together in the room is sometimes not enough. You can ask Dr. Jaishankar, he tried yesterday.
That I understand as well. When you're playing against Australia, you're playing against India, sometimes things don't work. They may not work for the first month, they may not work on the second trip, but on the third trip, they might work.
What?
Do you want to comment?
I was just tempted to say I wasn't negotiating with my wife.
I'm going to thank you all for your comments, and I'm sure your words will inspire many and will give guidelines for leaders of the future. Thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you.
The topic of this session is the old, the new, and the unconventional, assessing contemporary conflicts. And of course, the bulk of this conversation will feature Ukraine, but there are other challenges too, from Iran to North Korea to the spy balloons and everything in between. So we will talk about them and the changing nature of warfare. With me are three men who've led their forces and shaped the military strategy of their country. General Campbell, General Chauhan, General Mattis, good evening and welcome.
Thank you.
General Campbell, I'll begin with you. The war in Ukraine has completed 1 year. And in the last 365 days, we've seen different phases of it. We've seen rockets, bullets, bombs, and of course, unconventional tactics like cyber attacks. How do you assess the conflict as it stands today and the directions that it has taken over the past 1 year?
Look, thanks for the question. It is something that everybody, of course, is very interested in. I'm going to start by just emphasising, as many panellists have, this is an illegal, unjust, outrageous invasion and violation of sovereign territory and the integrity of a sovereign nation. And it is being waged from the perspective of the Russian forces in a deeply unethical and immoral fashion. It is a travesty of everything that a professional military should aspire to do in defence of sovereignty and integrity. In terms of where we are, war is a clash of wills. Everything else is and emerges from that. What I see is a Ukrainian nation unified under extraordinary leadership and with a will determined to resist. Equally, I don't see any change yet in the intent to prosecute at whatever cost to his own forces, his own country, and the people of Ukraine, being shown by President Putin in his determination to continue to prosecute this conflict. And I'm reminded of Minister Rasmussen's comment yesterday evening that if Russia ceases to fight, the war ends. If Ukraine ceases to fight, Ukraine ends. Until we see a fracture in will, and from my perspective, a fracture in President Putin's will, unfortunately, this war is going to continue, is my assessment.
You called war a clash of wills. How do you see NATO's role in this? Is this de facto now a NATO versus Russia war?
Not at all. Not at all. This is a Ukrainian defence of Ukraine, and yes, members of NATO and members of the wider international community, such as Australia and other countries from the Indo-Pacific, are seeking to assist Ukraine and their capacity to resist and defend.
General Chauhan, Randy Howard just said that this war in Ukraine is giving the world a blueprint for future wars. And I'm sure India has been watching the developments closely. How have these events made you, and if they've made you, reconsider India's defense priorities and preparedness?
As an army officer and as a CDS, I see this war from the point of view of military practitioner actually. So, and in this particular war, you find a lot of, it's a different kind of a war. Earlier, we all assumed that future wars are going to be short, swift, and fast. But this is a very longish kind of a war which we are seeing. And it has created many, many kind of contradictions actually. Say earlier when we thought that, we thought about dispersion and demassification was one. And now, over here, what we are seeing right now with the stage in which the war has entered, we find concentrated kind of attacks. We found, equipment which we thought was means of offensive operations, etc. That whole paradigm is getting changed. So there are a number of lessons actually which we could take from this particular war. But then as far as we are concerned, we got to see that how these lessons actually are applicable for the Indian Armed Forces and what lessons we should take from this. If you ask me, some of the lessons could be from this particular war would be that we have to be self-reliant actually. That's the biggest lesson actually for us. So we can't be dependent on supplies of our weapon systems, etc. from outside. That's the one big lesson that we take from this particular conflict.
You think it's become a war of attrition now?
Yes, of course. If you look at what's happening right now, is we have entered into a stage where the front lines are hardly moving. And today and yesterday's Bakhmut, if you see, even a 3-kilometer advance is being claimed by success by the Russians. Now we got stuck into a kind of warfare which is reminiscence of what you could say was First World War, trench kind of warfare. That's what we are actually stagnated into. This all has its own different kind of lessons in this.
General Mattis, your assessment of the war, and we know that America has sent more than $50 billion in aid, military and non-military aid, and weapons, and I understand that the West is now racing against time to send more weapons to Ukraine. Would you say that this war has also exposed the limits of the capacity of the West's weapons manufacturing industry?
Yeah, I can give you an argument that Russia would win this war in the first 3 weeks if you quantify what Russia had versus what Ukraine had. They should have been inside Kiev, and I can give you every objective measure that would say Russia won. But what you see here is the Western aid coming in to the valiant Ukrainian people, giving them the means to rebuff them. And not just rebuff them, but to throw them out of the country after penetrating dozens of kilometers inside. And as you look at this, we're reminded of one of the lessons of history that were mentioned by the earlier speaker up here. That is, nations with allies thrive, nations without allies wither. And you are watching Russia wither before our very eyes. As Prime Minister Modi pointed out, this is not an era of war, but when war intrudes, you've got to deal with it. But don't forget the human factors remain dominant, even as new technology comes in. Do we need good technology in the Indian Army? You're darn right we do. Because the more India is strong and speaks for India, the more calm things are going to get in this world. So we want that sort of strength, but we don't need it in the hand of a creature straight out of Dostoevsky who's going to act on his impulses of hatred.
There's a new old player in the game now, and it's called China. And there have been statements from the US, warnings on potential Chinese intervention and arms supplies to Russia. And there have been reports in the recent past about America's own preparedness in the event of a conflict with China. Do you think the US is prepared to open another front? And do you think that is the direction we are heading into?
I have absolutely no doubt the U.S. is prepared, but the whole point is deterrence. And one of the reasons we want to be adamant about our support of what's happening in Ukraine is because China is watching everything. And if Russia is successful at violating the sovereignty of that country, why would we think that China, that is declared a friendship without limits, why would they not be more attuned to moving against India on the line of actual control in the South China Sea against Vietnamese or Philippine interests, or against the people of Taiwan?
General Campbell, in 2021, global military expenditure crossed $2 trillion for the first time. And this was the 7th consecutive year that military spending increased. With the way things are going, would you say this trend would continue?
I think it is likely to continue. I'm not suggesting that necessarily is a good thing. Technology is driving the cost of military capability, and the anxiety in the international system is driving the preparedness or propensity to expend. Much of that anxiety emerging from scenarios such as the conflict in Ukraine or the extraordinary military build-up that we do see in some countries in the Indo-Pacific. As an example of that, the scale and also the rate of development of the PLA has been unmatched since the Second World War in terms of capacity, technological sophistication, and comprehensive scale.
I would just like to add to what the Australian CDS is saying. You know, we are living in a very uncertain kind of a world right now, and the global peace is kind of a flux. So in this uncertain world, actually, every nation is preparing for the other, for some kind of an contingency. What we are seeing is some kind of an, arms race. I won't say arms race, means all nations are building tech. Means, and you look at, say, South Korea, their exports have multiplied so many folds. You look at the defense budgets of most of the countries in Europe, again, much beyond the actual capacities to produce, actually. So they'll have to look at, production houses outside. So these are times of large amount of change. But the basic question is that for what kind of capability should you prepare, actually? For a short, intense war, or should you prepare for a long kind of a haul, what you're seeing right now? Because both those things require different type of weapon sets and technologies. So we'll see both types of things developing. One which is actually smart, the other would, you may call it dumb, but will require numbers also.
And in the case of India, you also have non-state actors.
What?
in the case of India, you also have non-state actors that pose a security threat.
So in case of India, actually, we would like, we have to see that what kind of challenges can we face in future. So we don't think that there's going to be a long, drawn-out kind of a conflict, what's happening in Europe. So ideally, we should have a healthy mix of both. And in case, what I mentioned actually earlier, our self-reliance or Atmanirbharta goal, that gives us a capacity actually to produce those what is required in large numbers. And for technology, of course, we still will dependent on friends and allies like Jim Mattis was talking about.
You think we're on track for self-reliance?
Yes, means we just taken some baby steps actually for past 2-3 years. Large number of initiatives have been taken by the government. And I think for these initiatives to succeed, the driving force would be the services themselves. So they're going to get their things right. And if they force the thing, then certainly we'll be able to achieve whatever the government wants.
General Mattis, since we're talking about an arms race and more military spending, we know the US is the only country that has used a nuclear weapon in combat. And now we heard the Russian president saying that they're not going to abide by the requirements of the New START Treaty, the nuclear pact. Do you find yourself, or does America find itself in a new sort of arms race, a nuclear arms race with Russia and China? And do you think that's unavoidable, this expansion of nuclear arsenal?
You know, we have to, again, look at the role of leaders here. We have heard a cavalier talk about use of nuclear weapons from Putin that we never heard from any part of the USSR. The Politburo, old men who'd been through war themselves, they knew how horrible it was. They knew that no matter what, we had to avoid nuclear war. And there was a consensus on this. During the height of the Cold War, during the Reagan administration, we were engaged with the Soviet Union, and we removed combined 75% of the nuclear weapons on the planet. So my point is, we need to get back to nuclear arms control. We need to get back to talking about these things. Putin has got to quit just discarding the treaties or violating the treaties the way he has, and get back to what we had before, and get the whole world back on this track to get rid of these horrible weapons, or at least keep going down little by little. I don't know that we'll ever get to zero again until we get a degree of trust in the world that we have not seen in our lifetime. But we can work on it and keep working it back down. And thanks also, I must point out here in India, to Prime Minister Modi's firm statement about no use of nuclear weapons. I think that India has a connection to Russia that may have made that message a strong and effective message that we are thankful to your Prime Minister for.
General Campbell, since we're talking about unconventional war, how big a role do you think the narrative war plays in deciding the fate of a conflict? Although it is not necessarily new, military strategists have always spoken about the power of narrative. Would you say that social media has made it more evident?
Every medium of competitive opportunity is going to be exploited in conflict from an Australian perspective and from the perspective of the nations here in the panel, in an ethical fashion, not necessarily so by others. So we see cyber, the public narrative, the exploitation of information and disinformation. We see all of that happening. I don't think that we should any longer see this as in some way unconventional and hence not innately inherent in the opportunity to prosecute modern conflict. And we are going to see that use of narrative as a normalised form. It always has been, but now the opportunities for narrative to be ubiquitously disseminated instantaneously and at scale and volume is with us, and it will be used.
But the biggest tech companies are in the West, and last I checked, they'd cancelled a lot of the Russian media, so I'm not sure how effective, what you say, this campaign to present Russia as a victim has been.
And I think that we've seen Russia over some decades now, a profligate user of cyber methods of information, disinformation, and offensive action. So I don't think that Russia is lacking in the capability to project a narrative. It is simply a narrative that is at great distance from truth.
General Chauhan, are soldiers today more sensitized, more cognizant of the power of narrative, and are you sort of shaping your strategy to make the most of it?
Palki, I think, as far as combatants are concerned, they should be focusing more on kinetic operations. Narratives will be built around it. That's my view. But war is not means fought only by combatants in today's modern war. So that's where actually the battle of narrative comes in, because the whole nation actually gets involved into it. I remember, I was a colonel actually when we fought the Kargil war of Vijay. That was the first televised war. So people in India took the war to the bedrooms actually. That's what was said actually. But today it's on to the social media. So ordinary citizens can participate into it, give their views, etc., and build that. Narratives are important, yes. I cannot deny the significance of narrative because, it gives you a notion of victory for the nation actually. So even a smaller victory can be portrayed as a large victory. So it's important, but for us soldiers, I think we should also focus on the kinetic aspects of it.
General Mattis, how do you see the role of the media? And do you think increasingly the media is being co-opted in the war that governments and countries
Well, I think
wage?
that's always been the case. The difference now, and your question's an excellent one, is the speed and the pervasiveness, the speed with which the message gets out, how pervasive it is, not just in your own society, but across the world. But I think for people with my color hair, we have to recognize we're going to have to do a better job of selling the values and the attributes of democracy, about why this freedom of thought, freedom of speech, the rule of law, why those things are so important. And I think it's very, very important in the democracies that we go back to step one. Why did India, when it got its modern day independence, why did it choose democracy? Why? It didn't have to choose democracy, could have gone another way. Why did the founding fathers, founding mothers of India choose democracy? Why is it so important that we be able to divide truth from untruth as we try to keep our societies working for the good of not just our own countries, but for the other countries? And we're going to have to create that kind of understanding with our young people.
Right, and this is a bit of a digression, but since you've mentioned democracy, how do you answer the critics who say that democracy has over the years become a convenient argument for Washington because you've had some undemocratic allies in West Asia, for instance, and the US was happy to do business with the Chinese as long as it worked out, and now China is seen as a threat?
Well, I don't think I have a good answer for you on that. It's a challenging question. Let me do an ambush here. It always works in the military, doesn't it, Tommy? How would you answer that one?
You answer it in national interest, sir. Data paramount.
Well, that's why I was never the Secretary of Defense, and you were. I thought you would have a better answer, but okay, I get it. I think that's an interesting note to wrap on, and I'm getting the signals. So thank you very much for your very interesting insights and inputs. That'll be all for tonight. Hope you enjoyed the conversations as much as I did. Do write to us and have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday.